Amazing.
Closure. They're protesting.
Hey, everyone. Love that I heard a little blip about protesters. There we are. Welcome. We're just going to keep letting folks in for the next minute as Nick was messaging in the chat. And then we'll get started in like a minute, but really glad to see people here. Just going to encourage everyone to introduce themselves in the chat, say your name, where you're joining from, whatever else brought you here. And then if you would share the most recent or the most ridiculous medical bill that you've received. I know I stopped going to my physical therapy office when I switched insurance, and I got a new bill that was just like, now you owe $500. And I was like, oh, I can't go there anymore. That's mine. And I'll introduce myself a little in a bit too, but I'll just put this in the chat. Joining from Queens. Welcome. We'll just give it a little bit more time. All right, that is the next person I let in. I'm gonna say that we can get started, and we'll just, keep encouraging people to introduce themselves in the chat and share when they, as they join. Welcome to Can't Pay, Won't Pay, collective price setting. That is where you are. It's October 30th. This is kind of spooky in some ways, in that we are all horrified by the healthcare system that we live in and the rising fascism that we live in. So we're here to talk about different ways to approach that, because as a famous Democratic candidate last year once said, you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. I don't know why I thought that was going to be a good intro. If you could go to the next slide, Nick. Really briefly, we'll just go the community guidelines and accessibility. Everyone is welcome. Please remain muted when others are speaking. Would really love it if people would come on camera if you're able, if you're comfortable. Also totally get when you're just like, I want to listen and I'm cooking or something. That's also cool, but it's just nice to see people's faces. Keep language and interactions respectful, both in the chat and in discussion. We'll use step up, step back. If you don't usually speak up, please do give it a try. And if you've already contributed, give others a chance to participate. If you're like, oh, I've been talking for too long, which I also do. You should also be wary of that when you're hosting. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your Zoom hand like this. It's like under the little react thing, or you can write stack in the chat. Or if there's discussion going on and you have a direct response, you're like, I know the answer to this, you can do VR. And then Zoom live captioning and auto translation are available. We're recording right now. We're not gonna publicize this without any, with anyone's names in it or anything. We also might not do anything with it, just for posterity's sake. But if you could go to the next slide. We'll go into a little bit more debt collective detail in a minute, but just for a quick overview, you are at a debt collective call. Welcome. I am Margaret. I work on the medical debt team at Debt Collective. We are a union of debtors, people organizing around the question of unjust debts in a world where we are denied the means to live. And we do organizing and political education and actions and little maneuvering where we can to fight back against this financialized world where we are not able to afford to live. And this is part of our like Jubilee School sessions, which I'll pass over to Nick for a minute to just give a little intro to that.
Yeah, so again, folks, welcome in to this amazing Debt Collective event tonight. And I'm an organizer with the Debt Collective. As Margaret was saying, this is a part of our Jubilee School, which is our political education within the Debt Collective, right? As we a lot of the time say within the Debt Collective, whether it's, healthcare, housing, education, we know that these things can and should be public goods, that we shouldn't be indebted for these things. And that's especially why we're having this free political education here tonight in this wonderful space. And also, yeah, just as a little disclaimer reminder, as Mark kind of said, we are recording, probably going to throw it up on the Debt Collective YouTube, but feel free if you want to change your name or anything, or show yourself on camera or not. The only thing that we'll be sharing as far as in that recording is going to be the slides and the folks who are speaking. So like myself, Margaret, Stephen, and anyone, if you feel so willing and moved to come and speak. That's the view that we'll share on the Zoom. But also, as Mark said, welcome. I would love to know if folks want to share. Is this your first time ever in a Debt Collective call, or your first time in a Jubilee School call, or have you joined us in before? If you want to share any of that in the chat, and then otherwise, I will pop it back over to Margaret to keep us going and flowing.
Yeah, and remind me, Nick, I put that in the chat. I don't know if you're visible in this picture, and I'm also not remembering if you were jail support or if you were in jail for that. But anyway, of the many ways to agitate around debt, one is sometimes going to actions in DC. Amazing. Okay. Cool. If you could go to the next slide, this is diving into can't pay, won't pay, which is basically the translation from Italian, although obviously this is the same word twice, but it's like that's the connotation is I can't pay, I won't pay. And then if you could click through this one, Nick, where there are these beautiful Google Slides animations. I'll pass it to you, Stephen, to introduce yourself. I already said I'm Margaret, based in Queens, New York, and organizer with Debt Collective.
Hello, my name's Stephen Piccarella. I'm calling in from Munson, Massachusetts. I'm an organizer and a writer and researcher. And the worst medical bill, most expensive, most unjustifiable medical bill I ever received was last year when I had to have an emergency surgery, and I was uninsured, and I was told that I would be eligible for financial assistance, and then found out that I was not. And that is when I reached out to the Debt Collective to talk about some political education around, seizing power around debt.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'm excited to, hear about just the way that like you were inspired to, or yeah, inspired to, and also just like agitated to, pushed to, because that is so often what happens. Come to us, and then also, delve deeper into all these histories of how people have used autoreduction, which we'll get into, in as a tactic in the broader fight for economic justice. And yeah, Emily, this pic is the cover of the play Can't Pay, Won't Pay, which we'll look at it again in a little bit. But if you go to the next slide, Nick. I wanted to start with a little bit of discussion, if we could get, even if you want to say something in the chat. I thought this was a fun Halloween. It's not a Halloween word, but if you want to go to the next slide so we can stop looking at the word art, because I looked at enough that it like lost meaning for me. But I want to just like bring up negotiation. That's kind of what we're talking about, what things cost, why they cost, and pose the question to any of you in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute. Have you ever negotiated a bill? What kind of negotiations have you done? I know that kind of gets flowery, where I'm like, what does it mean to you? It can mean negotiating in a relationship. It can mean negotiating in all these ways. But just wanted to pose that question to people. And, you know, with the more literal negotiation being like the idea of calling into, or, you know, a billing department in a hospital and negotiating your bill there. But it could be for really anything.
I can share while we're waiting that I am in an ongoing negotiation about the bill that I just mentioned. That's been going on for 10 months now. So it's anyone who has an experience, I can sympathize.
Yeah, Cassandra.
Hi. A couple of years ago, I had to have a CAT scan, and I was uninsured, but it was vital that I have this CAT scan. Um, so I had the CAT scan done, and when I got the bill, I had called the hospital billing department and asked them how much it was going to cost me, and they gave me this bill, and it was like, oh my God, I can't afford this. And they said, well, we can try to negotiate with you, you know, can you make payments? And I said yes. And then when I got the bill, I asked them if there's any way that we can negotiate down, you know, the bill. And they said, well, you know, asked me how much money, you know, I could afford to pay. And then I said, you know what, this is really a hardship on me. And so what I did was I just kept saying about, you know, I'm a single mom. I've got 3 kids that I'm raising. I don't get child support only on a hit and miss basis. I have to constantly take my, you know, ex-husband to court to try to, you know, get some child support out of him. So I really pled the case for being a hardship case. And but I don't think I should have to do that. I don't think anybody should have to do that. You know, plead the case that, you know what, this is really a hardship on me. I needed this CAT scan. It's not as though hospitals are, you know, running out of money. They have lots of money because that's just what they are, you know. And so anyways, they turned me over to a charity fund that they had, and they helped pay off my bill, but I was still being charged quite a bit. And it took me, I think the bill, you know, was, you know, covered partially by the charity foundation, but my bill, it took me 15 months to pay off my part of the bill. But I still was able to negotiate, but it still costs a lot. And it was still kind of rather embarrassing to have to constantly call and negotiate. So, yeah, I don't think that that's something that you should have to do.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you so much for sharing too. And I mean, you touched on this, and I don't know if you've been to a debtors assembly before too, but that's like one of these really powerful aspects of coming together to share stories about debt too, is that there is so much shame around it. And there's so much shame that is like placed on you, where you're just like, I'm an adult, I know how to handle myself, and now I'm suddenly in $5,000 of debt. What, like, it feels, that shame falls back on you. And the reality is that those prices are not things that normal people can pay. This is, again, this that Nick alluded to, that I said as well, you know, this is not that we are living beyond our means. We have been denied the means to live, and it takes, like, besides that is so infuriating, it takes courage to share that. So thank you, Cassandra. Yeah, and I'll wait if anyone else wants to come on stack, maybe. I actually, when I wrote this question down, I thought of a funny, like, during when the vaccine for COVID first came out, and my partner like went to a CVS to get or it was maybe when the testing first came out, and went to get a test, and was just this thing that it was like insurance hadn't quite caught up with everything that was going on, whatever. And he got a bill that was just like, this is exactly $100. And it was just like, the fakeness of where that number came from. It was just like, oh, this test to find out if you have the novel coronavirus happens to be 100.00. That this is this totally random. I'd love to keep hearing from people in the chat. We'll have some more time for discussion in this about this and other things and like what we're talking about. But if you still want to keep typing in the chat, always happy to hear more people's stories. But if you want to move on to the next one, Nick. I'm going to go over quickly, or as broadly as I can, the medical debt crisis and the medical industrial complex. It's a huge subject, and I, again, like I said about not wanting to just like talk too much at everyone. Have people heard the term medical industrial complex before? Just like raise your hand or something, or just type in the chat. But yeah, I think the more common term that a lot of people are aware of is the military industrial complex. It gets kind of like, you can expand it out the way that everyone calls everything like Watergate, everything else gate. The medical industrial complex, though, is actually pretty like, it is a, understandable to break into these three different pieces. And it actually does have ties to the military industrial complex as well, but I don't want to like get too bogged down with everything. I think a good way to understand it is as these three main industries. The hospital industry, pharma and biotech, which is where a lot of the connections to the military industrial complex are, and then the insurance industry, all of our most favorite, of course. The medical debt crisis, I'll say, is, this is not, it's not a medical debt crisis, it's a healthcare crisis. And we, kind of like to just continue to push this point home of like, medical debt is a problem, but medical debt is not something that it's a result of the profit-driven healthcare industry that we have in this country. 100 million of Americans, or 40% of adults, are in medical debt. The fact of the matter is, even within the hospital industry, even within some of these meager support networks that we have, whether it's for-profit, public, or nonprofit, all of it kind of comes down to operating in a profit-driven world. A few like main points in the progression of our healthcare wins that we've gotten in this country, I listed here: Social Security and SSDI, Medicare and Medicaid, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the ACA. All of these things, of course, under attack by the current administration. But this social safety net has always been not sufficient to actually care for people. Part of this has also been a pattern of just the general trajectory of the economy, the world economy, and American economy. The decline of organized labor in the end of the 1970s and into Reagan years, and this really top-down, I feel like a lot of people know we are living in the trickle-down economics era. Just somehow none of it ever trickles down to us. So again, sorry for this slide that's like, it's like 50 years, but in essence, we've had wins. We've gotten some of these programs that help people that are versions of public healthcare infrastructure that are, of course, under attack. And then we also have an economy that is rapidly has shifted over to service and to these medical industrial complex industries. And the gap between the ultra wealthy and everyone else has widened. So this is the medical debt crisis. If you go to the next slide, it is not a medical debt crisis. It is that medical debt does not exist in a vacuum. It is a symptom of a healthcare system that incentivizes the pursuit of profit at the expense of everyone and everything else, which I like to say because it's true. If you could go to the next slide. These next three are just like a few, more broad view. The Kaiser Family Foundation is a reputable health news source and do often these polls around healthcare. So here, this like very common statistic, most people, 2/3 of Americans are worried about being able to afford healthcare in this country. Next slide. This also just the astronomical costs of healthcare in this country. We pay nearly twice as much as, the average comparable wealthy nation. Next slide. And then this is like something that I think is it is very indicative of where our economy is, but also helpful because you see top employer in 1990, all of these, manufacturing and retail jobs, whereas in 2024, from this map on the New York Times, it's healthcare in basically every state. These giant, like the medical industrial complex through the hospital systems, through the pharma and biotech are like the #1 employer in almost the entire country, which is scary, but also that means that there are people working there. And that means that those workers have the ability to organize and to actually have so much power. And yeah, if you could go to the next slide, we're going to do another, try to not be like, this is 50 years in one slide. But so we kind of talked about medical debt, where healthcare is in the US. We're the only major industrialized nation, whatever you want to call it, wealthy nation that doesn't guarantee healthcare to people. And then for context of what Stephen is going to talk to us a little about the autoreduction, I'm just going back sort of to the beginning of the beginning of this chapter, I'd say, because I don't want to say it would be an insult to the people who kept the left alive to say that it was gone. But from the 2008 financial crisis until now has been a trajectory of like the left movement. Of course, people were keeping these economic and social justice causes alive ever since the 70s. There's so much to talk about back then. There, was a large anti-war movement during the Bush years, and then right before that, there's also a large organized protest movement against the World Trade Organization, against this like neoliberal economy. Again, this like liberalization that meant the world is becoming one economy, but somehow all the workers are always left out. And those protests were really key. As this wealth gap widens post 2008, I think a lot of people know, but every once in a while there'll be someone who's like 20 and they're like, I don't know what Occupy is, which that's fine. But then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm old. The 2008 financial crisis, the result of a bunch of Wall Street people creating a housing bubble that, again, can go into in great detail, but basically led to the biggest, economic fluctuation, this spasm of capitalism that really, really hurt the working class and pretty much everyone below the 1% richest in this country. Like I, wrote here, minimum wage has been $7.25 since 2009, right after the financial crisis. And as the Great Recession was ongoing, the Citizens United decision, basically granting personhood to corporations to buy our elections, meant that we just saw this like ever widening gap and this tension between the rest of us and the people who are, really sucking all of the wealth that we create up to the top. And in response to this, there has been, especially starting in 2012 with Occupy Wall Street, there were also teacher strikes, the first waves of Black Lives Matter after the murder of Trayvon Martin and then Mike Brown. Bernie Sanders' presidential runs in 2016 and 2020, and the next waves of Black Lives Matter protesting with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in 2020, as well as reactions to COVID lockdowns and all of these things, and then also leading into these protests against the Gaza genocide. This has been this sort of re reemergence, like wrote of of the left in the US that maybe wasn't as present in those interim years where it was very much the neoliberal, like capital D Democrats versus also liberal politics, liberal economic politics coming from certain sections of the right, and also the just like as an old friend would put it, is like the Democrats became Republicans and the Republicans became just like insane. But also not here to split hairs about political parties, because actually it doesn't, we're all just people. Debt Collective's roots are in Occupy. This was an idea of a couple of our co-founders, Astra and Thomas, thought, what if debtors came together and like combined their leverage of owing all of this, in that case student debt, in an economy that had not recovered from the financial crisis. And yeah, all of this organizing in these years was really, really crucial for getting to where we are now, which we'll talk about a little more. But basically, like, what I would want to highlight is this thread of people's economic realities and material needs being what is like really drawing people together and keeping them together. These economic woes exacerbate existing inequalities. Of course, like the way that Black people are in much higher rates of indebtedness, especially Black women, than are white people. So these economic inequalities just like balloon all of the other social inequalities. And the control of the capitalist class comes to rely on these to maintain a class of workers and debtors who are desperate to survive. And so that they're willing to work for lower wages, they're willing to work bad jobs so they can have healthcare, meaning higher income for the people at the top. In 1965, CEOs were paid 21 times as much as the average worker, versus in 2023, where CEOs are paid on average 290 times the amount of the average worker. So that's sort of where we're at right now. This is, again, like I said, really broad, but just getting us up to this moment of people coming together to organize around the unaffordability of life in this stage of capitalism, and especially in the United States, as our labor has been attacked, as manufacturing has gone down, and of course, like we talked about, people are in healthcare now, and what kind of power that might give us. That's something we want to keep talking about, but how difficult it's been in that there were so many fluctuations, and we do have this class who benefits off of our immiseration and the selling of war. So it can feel kind of bleak, but there's like a lot of life in people fighting back against this. No one has ever stopped fighting back. And yeah, I want to like get more into that, but I want to throw it now to Stephen to talk a little. We'll go time machine back into the middle of the 20th century. And thank you so much for bearing with me, everyone.
Thanks so much, Marg. And thanks, Debt Collective, and thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, Marg kept talking about 50 years and everything that's going on for 50 years. Now I'm going to actually go back about 60 years to a little bit earlier, and talk about a movement that was born in Italy in the late 60s, going into the early 70s, a movement called autonomia. I came to the Debt Collective to talk about autonomia because, as I mentioned before, I had received a surprise bill, or a bill for an emergency surgery that I was unable to pay, and that I was led to believe that I was not supposed to have to pay. My situation was actually not much unlike yours, Cassandra. I was uninsured at the time, and the hospital did not tell me how much I would be expected to pay. So when I got the bill, that was, much more expensive than I'd been expecting that I, would ever have the means to actually pay back. I reached out to a friend who uh, is a lawyer, and asked him for some free legal advice. And he suggested that I go back to the hospital and offer them a sum that I would be able to pay. So when my friend posed the suggestion to me, it made me think about all the reading that I'd been doing out of my own personal political and intellectual interest in autonomia, and a tactic that the autonomy movement developed called autoreduction. So this slide is a definition of autoreduction from an essay about autoreduction movements in Turin, Italy, which I'll talk about a little later on. But I'll read it word for word. I won't read everything word for word, but I think this definition is important. Autoreduction is the act by which consumers in the area of consumption and workers in the area of production take it upon themselves to reduce at a collectively determined level the price of public services. So what auto reduction basically is consumers, people who pay for goods and services, people who buy things, deciding amongst themselves what those things should cost. And then organizing ways that they can actually pay those prices rather than the prices that are set by the people selling the goods and services. The fact that consumers and workers are mentioned in this definition is very important to this concept because what the autonomy movement believes is that the people who produce goods, the workers, and the people who buy them are the people who really move the economy. They're the class that basically controls everything that happens. And the managers and the business owners who reap the profits, they're not the ones actually participating in what's happening, on the floor of the economy. So, basically, it should be the consumers and the workers who get to set the prices because they're the ones who are, on either side of these transactions. Next slide, Nick. So, for some background on the autonomy movement, in the late 60s in Italy, as elsewhere in the world, there are a lot of kind of sporadic, sometimes coordinated, sometimes not, protests, occupations of buildings, strikes by labor groups, protests at universities, and really just kind of like a continuing movement against the status quo, against the government, against businesses who are benefiting more from production and the economy than anyone participating in it, like the consumers and the workers. And at this time, a number of these student groups and a number of these groups of workers joined together and formed something called Potere Operaio, which means workers' power. Fun fact, opera is Italian for work. So operaio, operaismo, a lot of these Italian words have the word opera in them. And that will keep coming up. Next slide, Nick. The different groups had different names, but the cause that united the movement was the rejection of the wage labor system. So that's really important. The uh, the movement that's being born in Italy at this time among the entire working class, it's not just a movement to get people to be paid fairly for the work that they do. It's a movement to reject the entire system that people who are paid for their labor by someone who owns the company that profits off of all of that labor. These people are against this system and want a different structure for the economy altogether. On the other side of that is the Italian government, who is seeing all of this happen and is very upset about it. So they introduced something called strategia della tensione, or strategy of tension. Something that you'll hear about in protest movements in the United States is, people infiltrating movements who are actually not working for the movement. They're being sent there by someone else to try to like split things up or, cause chaos, disrupt things. In Italy, this is happening very, very blatantly and out in the open. The government is literally hiring fascist groups and far-right militant groups to commit acts of violence and then blame them on the protesting students and workers. So the stakes of this conflict become very high. Next slide, Nick. Going into the 70s, a lot of things develop very quickly. In 1970, there is a large occupation of a Fiat auto plant. Fiat is one of the biggest and most powerful companies in Italy at this time, and a lot of these workers who are leading these movements are auto workers. And these workers have unions, but their union system is kind of showing its limitations at this time. So there's actions that are more aggressive than those previously. And in 1973, there is also there's also a mainstream leftist movement in Italy at the time. And the leaders of the mainstream leftist movement are the Communist Party of Italy. The Communist Party of Italy was founded in the 20s and founded by self-identifying communists. But over the next 50 years, by the 70s, the Communist Party of Italy changes a lot and has very different goals and very different aims. And while the student movement and the workers' movement is gaining power and acting more autonomously and also just getting more attention for what they're doing, the Communist Party becomes increasingly worried about them, increasingly distrustful. So in 1973, the Communist Party um, makes a compromise with the Christian Democrats, who is the center right wing party that has controlled the Italian government for the past 30 years. So basically, the left wing, the mainstream left wing, and the establishment right wing join together to try to crush the radical movement. While this is happening, Potero Operaio, which had just emerged, decides to dissolve itself and rebrand itself basically as autonomia. And autonomia, workers' autonomy, is a much broader movement. It's not controlled by any central leadership. It's basically like I was talking about before, like the consumers and the workers, controlling the economy from the bottom. That's what autonomy is supposed to be. It's the entire working class, everyone who's not a business owner, everyone who's not what we would call in America now the 1%, acting together as a body and just kind of like asserting their autonomy. Next slide, Nick. So, autonomia is the movement that begins using the tactic of autoreduction. Autoreduction is first proposed after the introduction of the Carly Plan. The Carly Plan is a plan drafted by the head of the Bank of Italy, which basically significantly raises prices for transportation, electricity, uh, phone services, healthcare, housing, all public services. The leader of the Bank of Italy, who's not a member of the government or a owner of any of these utility companies, um, decides these services should be more expensive. These are entirely profit-saving measures. These are just measures to, um, yes, make everyone pay more for everything. Exactly. The working population of Italy reacts to this by organizing auto reduction efforts, auto reduction actions. In Turin and in other places in northern Italy in the mid 70s, unions start basically reaching out to everyone who's a beneficiary of these services, everyone who's a customer of these services, and saying, okay, we are going to start paying a fraction of these prices. They're actually able to do this because the way the bills are printed, the way like bus tickets are collected, they can actually basically make up their own documents for them and then distribute them to, it says here, tens of thousands of people. This is really like a very large movement in Italy. There's many, many thousands of people agreeing at the same time to pay a different price than the price that is set for literally the house that they're living in. And it's not a strike, but it is an assertion of it's almost I would argue it's almost more than a strike because it's basically an assertion of the control of the consumer over the economy. Um, Next slide, Nick. And here are some images from Italy during this time, which are all extremely inspiring. Yeah. Um, and we can keep going. So after auto reduction becomes a successful tactic, it kind of spreads throughout the autonomia movement. And then by autumn of 1976, you start seeing autonomia also like it includes workers, it includes labor unions, it includes the working class, people with jobs, renters. It also includes the youth. It includes the unemployed. It includes basically everyone on every margin of society. Once it becomes clear that setting your own prices autonomously is something that's possible, then people start doing it in all kinds of contexts and people of all ages. So, tens of thousands of youths in the suburbs of Milan, Rome, and Bologna pay reduced prices at cinemas, theaters, and restaurants. These are sometimes teenagers walking into establishments and saying, we're paying a fraction of the price that you're asking for the lunch that we just bought, for the movie that we're about to see. And this these tactics are a little more aggressive. And so the coordinated auto reduction movements around utilities were successful in most cases. The bus companies had to accept lower prices for transportation. The electricity companies had to accept lower prices for electricity, basically because the government told these companies, this many people are participating in this way. And it's going to be more to your benefit to accept their propositions than to try to, crack down on them. When groups of kids start going into cinemas and saying that they're only going to pay half the price of a movie ticket, sometimes people get angry, sometimes the cops get called. This climaxes in a pretty big confrontation between police and youth at the La Scala Theater, which every year hosts an opening night gala where tickets cost 80,000 lira. And when a very large group of Italian youth show up and saying, we're going to this gala and we're not paying for the tickets, the cops get called and there is a big confrontation. And there are a large number of incarcerations. Uh, and several several people are wounded as well. And that leads me to the next slide, which is a picture of this is not actually from the La Scala battle, but these are pictures from Italy at this time. And yeah, it all looks like this. One more slide, Nick. Yeah, so this leads me to the dissolution of autonomia. So one question that becomes very important to the autonomia movement is the question of political violence. There is a group called the Brigate Rosse, or the Red Brigade, who is a more militant faction of the left. These people, it's a much smaller and much more aggressive group. And of course, they have connections to autonomia, but they're not. There's basically a disagreement between autonomia and the Red Brigades about whether violence is the right tactic to be using. Most of the leaders of autonomia are not proponents of political violence. So in 1978, former Prime Minister Aldo Moro, who had been a member of the Christian Democrats for a very long time, was kidnapped and assassinated by members of the Red Brigades. This had nothing to do with autonomia. And this was not connected to or a consequence of any of the protests that members of autonomia were participating in, and not connected to any of the autoreduction movements. Despite that, I talked about the strategy of tension. I talked about how blatantly the Italian government is resisting all of these actions. April 7th, 1979, a important coterie, an important group of autonomia members and leaders, including Antonio Negri, who founded Potero Operaio when it first started, was a very important political leader in Italy at this time. Negri, along with these other members, is arrested. And then the government pronounces that Negri is being charged with being the secret leader of the Red Brigades. So this is kind of the long-term consequence of the strategy of tension. Autonomia was not intentionally trying to bring about this, more violent tendency on the left. But once it happens, the government decides that it can, use it to disempower the leaders of this movement, who are doing, completely different kind of political work, and in many cases, successfully leading people to the kind of power that we're talking about trying to build here today. And yeah, after April 7th, 1979, the movement officially dissolves. Um, and that is, yeah, what I came to talk about.
That was so great. Thank you for taking us through that, Stephen. And yeah, I'm just like, I like listening to it again, I'm just always like, it's so it does go so hard as like a power move to be like, no, I'm not paying that, but I'm not stealing. I'm gonna pay you what I'm willing to pay you. So you can also see how we also would have this, like, you know, how you had this great idea too of being like, why don't I pay what I can and believe that I should be paying for healthcare? You know, I just think to myself, like, I would pay $5 for an MRI. Sounds fair to me. But if you actually had the ability to back that up, if you could go to the next slide, Nick. Yeah, here's just, you know, this is also a spiritual successor to Debt Collective in being, you know, this like movement for economic justice in the left, in this, you know, shared history that we have. Can't pay, won't pay actually came from which like I think we had like rediscovered too upon Stephen wanting to come talk about autonomia, is like this, our manifesto from 2020, also, you know, inspired by the same title of a play during the time that was like about consumers reacting to prices and deciding on their own to take action. And now I'm also like the old theater kid in me is like, I want to put on a production. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of threads between these. It is, you know, it is part of the global movement for economic and social justice. If you want to go to the next slide, Nick, I think it's more fun. Yeah, word art, amazing. Can't pay, won't pay. Literally, you don't have enough money, you can't. So like we all have, like you were all talking about, and like calling the hospital and just being like, I don't have the money, I don't know what you want. Another Debt Collective member who, like, you know, he went into, I think, 200 some $1,000 of debt when he got a leg amputated, and just thinks it's funny. He's like, I don't know how you think I could pay that. So go to the next slide. I wanted to see if there's in these last few minutes, we'll have some follow-up of like next steps, but I would love to just like hear from people in the chat, hear you know, if anyone wants to come off stack, just some thoughts about this. We could talk about the other questions as well of negotiations and what this might, you know, learning about any of this might have brought up in thinking about negotiations. But yeah, just like, where do you see some of these related lines of thinking? Do you see this kind of thing being powerful in the United States, or possible, given, you know, also our different history of the organized left and organized labor? And then, yeah, just like, I guess also just to, if everyone wants to, like, if you've received a medical bill that you could not pay with the money in your bank account, type 1 and just respond in the chat. I know I have. And just, you know, also want to point out the moment we're in now of, you know, the big shitty bill that was passed on July 4th that, you know, takes so much money out of the little healthcare infrastructure that we do have. And now we're going on a month of a government shutdown, also kind of centered around healthcare and the fact that we haven't fixed it in this country. And that, yeah, I guess I'll just open it up then, more than just these questions. If anyone wants to share about their yes, thank you, Braxton, in the chat, and also Cassandra. I think it is possible, but just like anything else, it oftentimes will attract the loonies. This is also, yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone, yeah, made some of these connections in to some of what's happening now too. You know, I thought especially of, I mean, someone who wasn't even nominally involved in some kind of protest movement, but the way that the Trump administration just claimed, you know, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is in a gang and just said he's in a gang and that's it. And sort of the same way that they were able to clamp down on autonomia after the assassination of former Prime Minister Moro. Yeah, and then I just also want to highlight, yeah, Braxton's in the chat. I'll read these out too. But there's some exciting organizing happening with the housing and housing debt and debt collective as well that uses similar tactics. That also we will hopefully be holding another Jubilee School on like how that sort of fits in too. But definitely check that out, and also check out your our housing organizing, tenant organizing in general. Jenna, I think it's helpful for people to know they can push back. Yeah, those are
I wanted
all.
to add to that actually as well. I think like something that I wanted to make a point to say is that autoreduction is a lot like negotiation, but the difference is it's a collective action. Like I would say like the first step is knowing that you can push back, and being able to ask questions or being able to reject a payment is huge, and it's always possible on an individual level. But I think it's also it's very can be very encouraging to keep in mind that not only can you push back, but there are going to be a lot of people like you who will be willing to do it and will want to do it, and you can actually get together with them and do it as a group.
Yeah, that's so crucial of this. Like it isn't just, acting on your own, which we do want to keep going into that. Actually, yeah, in these last it's 9 now. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Nick has also shared this in the chat. Check out all of our upcoming events. If we could actually, let me just do oh, did you go back to the slides? Sorry. But yeah, so we'll have a few upcoming healthcare events, being that our national monthly medical debt call, that'll be on the 17th. And then also our next can't pay, won't pay, that's related to this, where we will actually start going more into how to negotiate those bills, ways that individuals can do that, and how we might try to collectivize that process. Rust Belt Health Watch will be a more localized call. If anyone's, in sort of the Pennsylvania, Ohio, I guess, Rust Belt area, I don't need to define that probably. Would love to have you join. We'll be talking about some of the effects in rural communities and organizing that can happen there in response to the Trump cuts. And then, yeah, the next slide is these Jubilee School sessions. Organizers and members of the debt collective coming together to teach each other these things, to get each other thinking, and also a new member call if you haven't been. All of this again listed online. And yeah, I mean, I guess before more people drop off, since it's 9, I just want to thank you all so much. This has been really great. I really hope that we'll see you at the next one in a little under a month. And then lastly, the last one is, if you are a healthcare worker, there's also, with the lovely Emily, who is on this call. I don't know if you want to say a word about it, Emily, but the Healthcare Worker Solidarity Network.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, and maybe we can drop the join form in the chat, which I could find, or I don't know if anyone's on the web.
I can find the join
Okay,
form.
okay, yeah. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm also on the medical debt abolition team, and I want to say thanks, Marge, and thank you, Stephen, for a great talk. It's always wonderful learning about resistance movements all over the world. We all need to be internationalists. So really appreciate this. And I'm a nurse practitioner, and we've started a working group, the Debt Collective, called the Healthcare Worker Solidarity Collective. We meet every 2 weeks on Wednesdays. Our last one was yesterday evening. And we're really kind of just democratically figuring out what we're going to be doing together. We're reading and talking about the things that we face in our workplaces and just kind of figuring out projects together. And it's a really wonderful, nourishing space. It's a lot of mental health workers right now, but we're open to any kind of healthcare worker, whether you're in, pharmacy, or if you're a nurse or a doctor or a medical assistant, really any kind of healthcare worker. We want to build solidarity between us as well as solidarity with our patients. So we have our mission statement up on the website. So if you read it and you agree with our general principles, then please click the join form and I'll add you to our recurring meeting every 2 weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, and thank you everyone for coming by. I hope that we'll see you at some of these Jubilee schools that are coming up and medical debt events, and also just in the streets, because there really are more of us. And there's a lot to fight for.
Thank you all so much.